me pointing at the green, that would make that particular painting going to dominate that painting with 70% greens. Now, directly opposite that, it's complementary, which is red, but we don't tend to use that in equal amounts. In fact, we call that the spice colour. What's more important is that we let a triangle here, and at the top of that triangle is the dominant. So the dominant green, in terms of surface area, physical surface area of your painting, is going to dominate. The green is going to dominate. And if we use a simple math like 70%, these two down here, the red on the right and the purpley blue on the left, we would call these the split complementary. So 70% up here of the greens, and the remaining 30% of this painting will be taken up with the purple and the red in whichever amounts, however you want to break that 30% up, 10% of the purple, 20% of the red. And then you had that spice colour down the bottom, the direct complementary, into your focal point. So as I say, you need to break the space up with this type of ratio. And we'll certainly do more on that in future lessons. So let's put together the drawing now. Just start over here on the left with the house. I'm going to leave out the car on the left, this big sort of 4x4 thing. It's not really in the right place. It's a bit of a chunk of a shape and too distracting. Just drawn some lines there as though they were this gentle perspective. I wouldn't worry about the perspective here because these roof lines and ground lines are almost flat, so don't go panicking about getting perspective right on the building too much. Don't worry. This, what I'm penciling in here now, is as you look at your photo, is there's a group of houses, and the one I'm drawing at the moment just happens to be my actual house where I live, and as I speak to you, that's where I am. So there's my neighbouring house. So I took this photo about 7 or 8 days ago. So just complete the little cluster of buildings that we've got in our little neighbourhood here. So a couple of gable ends, a couple of horizontal roofs. Just going for the basic shapes. So I'm just starting to put the tree in here. And there's this sort of, in my photo, the same photo that you've got, of course, I have this cluster of lovely warm old bracken, a really, really lovely warm coppery colour. But I'm just making sure my tree goes out of shot here, that my branches go beyond the edge of the paper. I'm going to put a suggestion of a vehicle here because there is one in the photo. What I do is I tend to draw a lot of things in. It doesn't mean to say I'm going to use all of it. I like to keep my options open. So if I don't like this in the greater plan as the painting develops, if I don't like it, I simply won't put it in. It's drawn in with pencil, it can be erased. So if I were to put in the vehicle, it would be about here, but I'm just drawing it in so you can see what I mean. But I'm probably going to use that space and create a made-up shape there, maybe a fence post or the suggestion of the another house, the wall of another house. Here's my car. I've decided I think it'll need something in the middle of the road, so I've just put a car in. Again, I'm more likely to use this one because it's in a better spot than the one on the left. Just putting in a couple of figures in the middle of the road, taking a morning stroll. I'm not sure whether they'll stay there because they're a bit centrally placed, but they seem to work for the moment. So I'm just getting an idea of boundaries, edges, what's at the edge of this left-hand, at the left-hand side of this road. But it's very important that you see this wall in front of the house. That's going to act as a visual linear signpost to take us into the road, down the road. So roughly speaking, that's where the tyres of the car, the wheels of the car meet the road. As I say, ideas come to me quite often in the drawing process, and it's a way of helping me make sense of things. I always say in my packs that I send out to people, when you're putting your drawing together, if you're trying to copy mine exactly, I would advise you against it, because you only need to be a millimetre out with one object, say the car, and then a millimetre out with where the feet of the figures meet the ground, and it's not going to look right. So check, double check. That sort of measure twice, cut once, but check how things lie. You should always have a good sense of the lay of the ground, and how one shape meeting the ground, like the wheels of the car and the feet of the figures, where they meet the ground, and does it make sense? Are they on the same bit of ground? It's so easy to make to place these in the wrong place, and have the car or the figures look like they're hovering above the ground. So it's having a sense of the ground level. It's not perspective. So I'm just pointing out here this issue, that make sure you're happy with the height of the heads of the figures, where the feet meet the ground, where the house, how that relates to the house to the left. You sometimes have to imagine you can animate this scene as though you're making a film, and have your figures walk over to the house. Are the figures able to get through the doors of that house when they get there? Are they too big? Are they too small? So flat ground, just think, always keep in mind the ground, the lay of the land, the lay of the ground. I got that. So I'm just putting in the edge of the road here. So to the right of this line is frosty grass. And I'm just going back, mentioning that ground level thing too, because if this is grass over on the right, then this cluster of brackeny gorse, this bush on the right here, seems to be at the same ground level, meet the ground at the same plane, as same level as the feet of the figures. So bring that down to the same level as where the feet of the figures are, and then you've suddenly created a very flat horizontal area of ground. So I'm just deliberately going a bit bold with this line. That's my road. That's the distant bit of road that's still visible. I want to keep that light, so I go around it with a heavy pencil line. You don't necessarily have to do that, but I like to do it so I don't forget. So what I'm doing here now is we're staying with this issue about making the ground look correct. Look, when I'm putting in this line as I just did on the left, I'm making sure that it relates to the line that I made for the edge of the road on the right hand side of the road. It's the same with riverbanks, and you can end up with, you can make it look like your river or your canal is going uphill from side to side, horizontal, across the plane. So there isn't really a rule for this. This is something you just have to keep drawing in lightly until you feel it's in the right place. So I'm just checking things now, going around the car, erasing a little bit of couple of marks I didn't like. So the gap between this vehicle, if that's what it is, and these two figures, that's, I need to put something in there. So I'm going to continue the wall. I know what's there in real. I've walked this path obviously quite a few times, and there's an old dilapidated stone wall there, all grown over with mosses and grasses, and it's rather lovely. But in this case, of course, we're not talking about detail, but it is serving the purpose of a horizontal dark shape that again sends us down the road and into the painting. Now, I've gone to the telegraph post here. This post, this telegraph post here, and the tree are the only real verticals in this, otherwise 70% horizontal. So if we think back to what I was saying about the colour wheel, how we used 70% green and made up the smaller amount of the other colours, exactly the same rules apply to just about every composition element you can think of: lines, colours, tones, shapes. So what we've got is a predominantly 70% horizontal. It's a landscape after all, so there's a sense of flatness and horizontal about it. So the vertical of the lamppost, or telegraph post rather, and the tree is offering the much needed vertical, 30% vertical. Without those verticals, the brain, the eye, or both would be desperate for to see a vertical in an otherwise bland, heavily dominated horizontal landscape. So I'm talking here about the grid, which is something I talk about a lot through my tutorials. The grid is simply two equispaced verticals and two equispaced horizontals. It gives you a sort of noughts and crosses grid. So I'm putting my hand here where I could use, there'd be an intersection between the vertical and the horizontal line. That's potentially a good spot for a focal point. Now that means that my figures probably need moving, which I'll do in a bit. So there's the telegraph post. Look at that, bang on the equidistant vertical. If you pushed it out to the left hand side, it's okay, you can do that. But if you pushed it inside into the middle where I'm pointing to, I would make it a smaller telegraph post. Because one, if you moved it into the middle, it would suggest that the scale of it would plant it right in the middle of the road. So you avoid that. And the tree again is on that vertical. Look how that pencil sits on the vertical line that I speak about the noughts and crosses grid. They're reliable rules. These are reliable composition, constructional, aesthetic rules. So you don't have to use them all of them, you could just have the telegraph post without the tree, and vice versa. But the balance is important. So telegraph wires, when we put them on there, that would also help, just like the lines in the road, to guide our viewer down to the end of the road. Here's a smaller post further down the road, a smaller telegraph post. You can connect cables between these two telegraph posts and it'll take you down the road. So it's always good to have a simple story. You know, it is a simple storyline. You're inviting your viewer to join these two characters walking down the road. It could be you. You could be the figures in that painting, and the direction that you're wanting to walk in. There, I've decided to move them, as I say, because they're going to be of far more value if we put them more into the focal point territory, this bottom right quadrant. So there they are. They're in the sweet spot. Car can stay there because that's close enough to the figures. That's a much better composition. You have to, of course, try to avoid avoid making a powerful statement in the center of your composition, in the center of your paper or your canvas. Just showing you this, I just bought a couple of new brushes, quite cheap, from Rosemary & Co. It's a synthetic brush, size 3 round, and I'm just going to use up a bit of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. I found this little cap off something that came as a Christmas. Took this little plastic cap and I've put my ultramarine blue and my burnt sienna in here. I've done this because I want to make a dry mix. It's a nice strong mix. If I were to try getting this out of my palette, my main palette that I use for painting, it gets a bit too wet sometimes. So this ensures that this paint is thick, dry, and allows me to do these all important dark shapes. The tree, anywhere else, you'll see me almost draw. It's almost as though I'm drawing with paint. I'm following my pencil work mostly and doing a bit of embellishment as well. So just get some of the main branches of the tree in here. And the reason why I do this is because this paint will, it's a bit glue-like in its consistency. It'll stick to the paper. So I'm just doing a little bit of rigger brush here for the finer branches. I'll do more of this later. The idea of this has been, when I get a lot of this drawn linear work in, I'm able to put washes over this, and that has, here's the telegraph post. Notice how broken the application is. It's not a solid paint line. You know, the effects of light on things, this is how things are seen. Yeah, so when the washes go on top of this, it'll have the effect of dissolving and softening some of these shapes. And that's good because we can always paint them back afterwards, but it's good because we soften shapes to stop them looking like they've been cut out with a pair of scissors and stuck on your painting as an afterthought. So let's do a little bit more here and a bit more there. So I'm just delineating the edge of the roof of the house here, the under side of the roof, and top edge of the roof. So just placing in windows, a hint of windows. Notice that there's nothing perfect about those shapes of windows. They're the abstract shapes rather than the a sort of carbon copy shape, because all shapes are affected by light, so you often don't see the perfect shape. That little shape I did to the next to the car there is it's a hawthorn tree that I know is there. Might not be that visible in the photo, but I know it's there, and that's a nice way of breaking up that line. So as I say, all this sort of sticky, keep your water to an absolute minimum when you're using this application of paint for this. I don't. It's not a particularly common practice to work this way, but for certain scenes when colours are quite clear, bright days, scenes with bright days as we're doing here, I think it works well. I like using this method of putting in a sort of paint drawing. Only to, go over it with washes afterwards. So, how much of this you do depends on how much delineation you need to make. In other words, how many things, how many components and shapes do you need to outline? I'm outlining the slope of the field as I speak. And I'll outline these houses, but I'm using a more watery mix for these houses. I've added a bit more water, and I'm a lot more water and tending to take the blue. If you look at this, I'm taking the blue for this particular mix because those houses are further away from us. So a lot more water, and mainly using ultramarine blue. And it may look dark as it goes on, but trust me, I know that that's going to dry paler than the darks that are already on there. Try to paint quickly like this, freely. Live with the consequences, live with the fact that when you're learning to paint this quickly, you will have some bad paintings. But the sooner you get the bad ones out of the way, the sooner the good ones come along. That's the way you got to look at it. Stop looking. Try not to be thinking, "Oh, this is going to be my best painting ever." They tend to come from the best paintings tend to come from when you switch off and you almost feel like you're painting to pass the time away. It's strange how the quality comes through when you stop getting overly sensitive towards things. Or overly precious. I'm just doing the slope in front of our houses back there. There is this hedgerow, and again, it looks quite dark, doesn't it, the paint? But it does have quite a bit more water in it. You'll have to take my word for it. And then the landscape in the background goes over here somewhere. As long as I put plenty of water into that, it should be okay. Just to make a bit of a backdrop there. So nearly there for this, what I call paint drawing, or drawing with paint. I'm just checking things out now. I like these, in the photos you'll see there are tyre tracks in this road, and those can be really useful. So I pick up both the colours, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, probably a bit more burnt sienna in this because it's the foreground, but very little water, and try to make these road track lines quick, as you can see, very quick swipes of the brush. That helps for the paint to fall in a broken staccato sort of application. Do them quickly again if you can, because the speed of that helps to break the paint up, helps to create that broken delivery. So I'm going a little bit heavier at the nearer edges of our road here. That line there was just to remind me that this is all flat ground, despite what the lines might be suggesting. So, checking now for, we're getting very near. I think we'll put a chimney in here, because it sort of wants, I don't know, it's almost like a punctuation mark at that line as you come up from the road. So a bit of a chimney. And I'm going to speed dry this now, so bear with me folks while I do that. This is a 1-inch flat brush. It's a wash brush. It has a blend basically of both synthetic and fibre. Not to be confused with say a synthetic flat brush. You can't use synthetic flat brushes as wash brushes. You have to pick up and be able to deliver a lot of paint and water. So what would you use the synthetic flat brush for? Well, they're fantastic brushes because you can use them for smaller amounts of paint required when you can make very geometrical shapes. Come in very useful for making buildings, silhouetted buildings, wonderful in rock faces, cliffs, coastal scenes, also many things. But they don't hold much, so this is what you need to be using. So we're going to start with some ultramarine blue at the top of the sky. As we come down to the houses, we'll warm that up with some raw sienna, burnt sienna, because that's where the sun, the winter sunshine is hitting on those lovely houses at the back there. So a wash will come down, and it'll go over. This is what I was saying earlier. It'll go over the telegraph post, it'll go over the tree, and it'll just soften some of those shapes. They can be painted in again later, but here I go. The one thing is, I will say, my caveat to this method is you can't keep brushing over the telegraph, these shapes, the telegraph post and the trees. You can't keep painting because you will dislodge the paint, reactivate the paint, and it will dissolve too much. So count your brush strokes. I literally used to do this, and talking about economy of brushwork in the loose style. But absolute maximum 4 brush strokes over those shapes before paint starts to move, before you start spoiling it. And be very light of hand over there, so don't push down with the brush. As I say, otherwise that telegraph post will disappear into the sky. Here goes that warm hit of sunshine. That's burnt sienna, a little bit of raw sienna. Can use a little bit of cadmium yellow in there too. And then watch what I do here. The flat brush is cleaned at this, so I've delivered the blue, I've delivered the brown. Look at the brush. The bottom of the corner of that brush is in contact with the warm colour over the houses. The top corner of that flat brush was making contact with the blue in the sky. And if you just drift the two together in that way, as long as there's not too much water in that brush, then you'll have a lovely transition where you won't get too much of the warm dissolving into the blue and vice versa. So let's move to the field. Now this is a much stronger, purer mix of burnt sienna and raw sienna. Again, you could use, if you wanted to, you could add a bit of cadmium yellow. But go strong, go rich. We must remember with watercolour that all colours dry out much paler. So that may look quite strong, but it will dry out. If we were able to time travel here, we could speed forward instantly. I mean, it will pale off as we watch, I know, but if you could do a quick comparison, you'd see that the colour is actually a lot paler by the end of the painting. So try to err towards a stronger mix, and this is why tube colours are so important. It would take you 3 weeks to scrub away at those little dry pans that we use. I take every opportunity I can to steer people away from dry pans when working in the loose style. Does depend a little bit on the size of the paper you're working on, but even if you're working on small paper, this is the smallest paper I work on, 15 by 11. For the loose style, I wouldn't go smaller than that, because you need to be painting from your arm. You need to have the free movement. The free movement over a very small piece of paper is going to be a bit like painting the living room wall with a roller brush or something. So try to paint up the size of your paper to at least 15 by 11, and then, as I say, use tube paints and make broad, full, from the shoulder paint strokes. I'm talking about the brush strokes for this particular area of the painting, the washes, the big washes. So these buildings up here, you can see there's a slight drift of that warm colour into the sky and a slight drift of the cool colour into the buildings. That's fine, but we're going to go back into those buildings later and redefine them, so you won't even notice that drift, that crossover. So we need to look at, I think I need to address the two cottages on the left, the little buildings on the left. So this is a typical place where I'm never too sure. It's not whether in the plan. Couldn't be. You plan so much. It's good to play your drawings in your position, but when it comes to painting, you've got to you've almost got to discard the plans. So what I do is, as I'm doing here, I try something. I've just picked up a bit of ultramarine blue burnt sienna that's given me that grey. I've added a little bit of alizarin crimson to it. And what it is, it provides me with a test, like a swatch if you like, provides me with an answer to a potential problem. That's the neighbouring colour is warm in the field behind it. So if I were to make this building too warm, I'd be missing an opportunity to create interest. It would just be warm into warm. The buildings would disappear. You'd think, hang on a second, is that meant to be a building? It looks like it's part of the field. So you deliberately go the opposite. You have a warm field, therefore the building has to be cool. It's all about playing warms against cools, hard lines against soft lines, horizontal lines against vertical lines, excuse me, strong colours against weak colours. But doing all those things in the correct ratio, that's, 70-30. And please, 70-30 is a rule of thumb. Something has just got to dominate. Don't go counting out your... Don't go reaching for the micrometer or whatever it is they measure these things in. Just play it by ear, but remember the rules. Okay, so yeah, I like this. It's just shaping it quite nicely. In fact, that the blue of that building really sings now, or is it the field that's singing because of the blue of the building? So I'll come back to different elements as we go a bit further down the process. So everything from here down is foreground. You notice as I said, I've worked from the back to the fore, from the background to the foreground. So the background and midground has been tackled. Let's start dealing with the foreground. And so I'm mixing up here a bit of ultramarine blue, and I'm going to tackle the road. And I've put in, this is actually ultramarine blue with a little bit of phthalo green. You can see how it offers a beautiful complementary colour to the warm fields, the warm areas of the painting. So I'm keeping this road, specifically this colour, because the sides where I'm pointing to here with my fingers are grassy areas, and I'll need a slightly different colour for that. Now have a look at what's happening with these earlier lines that I made with the dry paint, those lines in the road. They're softening, as did the telegraph post and the limbs of the tree. They're softening as the washes go over them, and it makes them look far more convincing. They don't look as static and stuck on. So I've just picked up a little bit of alizarin crimson here and added it to that road colour, and this little bit of subtle colour change in the road will help prevent the area from looking flat. Incidentally, if we were wanting this to look like a snow scene, it's there, isn't it? If you look at the white spaces, you've got a ready-made snow scene. Short of putting a small amount of shadow through that white snow in places, a couple of spattered bit of paint, you've got a snow scene. But we're doing a frosty morning, so let's stay focused to the job in hand. So I'm mixing up phthalo green. So where the road was dominated with the ultramarine blue, this is going to be dominated with the phthalo green. I did a little test hit there. It's very weak, very watery for the moment anyway. This is the same two colours as the road, but very interesting. What needs noting here is that so in other words, it was ultramarine blue and phthalo green, but it's the phthalo green that's dominating this mix with a much smaller amount. You could even sort of say it's 70% phthalo green, 30% ultramarine blue. Now I've added a little bit of raw sienna to that to make a slightly warmer green. We do need to convey this message of it being grass, albeit frosty grass. It is a grassy area. But the colour colour combos, the colour combinations, this are working rather well. I'm enjoying this, but it's not. Although there are a number of different colours already in this, it doesn't look overworked in terms of too many colours, and that's because each colour, when you study the painting, is isolated, if you like, in its own territory. You don't get too much of one colour running into the other shape and vice versa. That would create a muddy overall look. So shapes are allocated their own colours, if you like. You could look at it that way. The field has its colour, its own colour. The grassy verges on either side of the road have their own colour. The road has its own colour. The house on the left has its own colour. So I'm just weighing things up again here, and again, as I did on the opposite side of the road on the grass, I just added a little bit more raw sienna. So that's all the wash is done, really. So I'm conscious now of this linear, this line that takes us down the road. I think we need to be addressing that. There's probably not enough emphasis on that. Still haven't decided whether I'm keeping the car on the left. I probably will leave something there. So I think we'll leave things as they are and let these washes dry thoroughly. You must do that. You must let things dry thoroughly and speed dry them if necessary. I think it's always good to take a break. Now, I think my plan is to work from the back to the front. Okay. Again, I realised quite a while back that you can paint with watercolour, probably any medium for that matter. You can paint the same thing many different ways. I don't have to start from the back to the front, but I feel more comfortable in doing that. I think it's because I want to sort out a potential issue. Once that's done, if I can sort out that potential issue, I just feel a lot more confident to proceed with finishing the painting. So now then, these may be relatively, I'm talking about sort of painting around the houses and giving these little houses some solidity. Now you could do that with a small brush, couldn't you? It'd be so easy to think, well, it's only a small area. I'm only painting down the side of the house there. I'll use a small brush. That's your first mistake, to be honest. You want to stick to a brush that'll give you a single stroke. Do what you need to do with a single application. Okay, so I'm going to mix a sort of shadowy color, a distant shadowy color, which will be ultramarine blue, a bit of alizarin crimson, and just to take the garishness off that purple, I'll just add a little bit of raw sienna to it. So you can get these colors if you miss them now, folks, on the video. Okay. Oh, and while I'm at it, another plug. Please, if you're going to watch the video, folks, please remember, if you don't mind, to hit the like button. Thanks. Right, so I see a dark roof shape about here. One brush stroke. Down the side of that house seems to be a... Oh, I know what it is. What am I talking about? It's my neighbour's garage. About there. So there's that sort of triangle shape where my finger is. Triangle of light. This building seems to be mostly in shadow. And then it comes down in this sort of fashion, like this, to something like that. Use my finger quite a bit these days, a lot more than I used to. I don't know exactly what's going on behind here, but it's to this effect. Something as I study my photo, it's obviously a row of trees back there. Even though I know the area from this angle, it's not as familiar as it perhaps might be. So what else? Further up here, we have another end of the building, quite a tricky one, this one, because it's only a slither of dark about there. And this is now a little too, it's too perfect, really, this end building. As perfect as my house is, and it is my house, I don't think it works to keep a perfect shape there. So I'm going to suggest that there are some bushes and trees up here along that. This is a lane that comes down here. So these little shapes are trees, bushes, I should say, not trees. And they can throw that path onto my house, that shadow onto my house there, which thus breaks up the perfect pale shape. And I'm just, with the small brush, I'm just softening the edge of that shadow on the house, because at this distance, shadow edges are going to be softish. Now that I've done that, I'm much happier with that, but I now feel as though the delineation of some roofs and edges could be increased. So where's my little, there it is, there's my little mini palette of blue and brown, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And I'm back to this little brush in a sticky mix, and I'll just add a little more definition to a window. Maybe to this roof, just this front edge of the roof line there. The garage here has a door. That will be sufficient. And I think we can probably leave that. If I get too involved in that area, it's going to distract where I really want people to look. Now then, I'm going to start working from, working from the back to the front. So staying with what I think is down here at the bottom of the field, down the road, I'm going to put in some dark shapes, some dark line. So that line is sort of emanating from this round the corner here somewhere. It shows us the edge of the road. Make this a little bigger, I think. A bit taller in areas. And as you can see, as these really sticky, Diane and I were having that conversation. Sorry, Jill, wasn't it? Jill Daniels, were having that conversation a moment ago about using tube paints. This is really gloopy paint. This is what brings impact into your paintings. You can only get these darks from tube paints, this strength from tube paints. So there's my telegraph post again. I could put in a little bit of extra, whatever these things are, they attach to that hold on to the cables of the telegraph post. Put a few fresh ones of those in next to that. I think I'm happy with the telegraph post. I don't think I need to paint over the post itself. I will need to go into the tree a bit more. But this dark line that runs along the side of the road is really important. And I have to sort of do something similar here as we move out of this corner, the bend in the road here. A bit darker again, a bit of dry brush across the grasses here. Not too many. There we go. Something up here. Same this side. I'm suggesting that there's a slight, in the photo, this is still tarmac. But I do know that there is grass on this side of the road. So I prefer to see that. Okay. Now this is where you should be careful. If you start moving out, this is the sweet spot. This is the area that we're taking our viewer. Always put yourself in the position of your viewer. Always imagine that you're the person looking at this painting. It's not your painting. It's been painted by somebody else. Is it making sense? Are you sending your viewer, are you giving them a message that they've got to go down this road here? And you can do that, as I say, by increasing the detail and the strength, tonal value, color values in the focal point territory. As you move out of that, as though this were the center of a clock face, if you move out of the clock face territory towards the peripheral, things are diffused. Okay, I think I'm more or less where I need to be with this. It really comes down to now doing the tree, that is with a rigger brush. So I'm just putting this little number 4 round brush down, and I'm picking up, I'll show you, picking up a rigger brush. Can't see it that well, I can see it better if I hold it there. So I'm picking up my rigger brush, using the same colors as I used for the tree earlier, and that was ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. I remembered the names of them then. It's not so much remembering these color names, it's just that your brain's not it has no reason to think of names. You're thinking about creativity rather than, I don't know, you need a psychologist or something to answer that one, I suppose. I just don't. I've heard other people say it when they're demonstrating too. I remember years ago being at Cardiff Arts Society, and I think the tutor was a lovely chap by the name of John Hoare, and remember him saying exactly the same. And I've heard other people say it on their tutorial videos. For some reason, there is definitely a different part of the brain required to remember the names of colours. You have to stop and reset the brain. So this is, as I say, mostly ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Quite a strong mix again. Don't be afraid to take these branches across the scene like this, so that they actually make contact, if you like, with the distant houses. They seem to appear over them, laying over them. I can bring out a little bit more sort of suggestion of busyness down at the base of the tree here. And I you know, a lot of the time I hold the brush like this. It's that the rigger brush is an extension of that index finger on my right hand there, this one here. And it's just held in place with the neighboring finger, the middle finger and the thumb. And you go in, you get close, and when you think the tip is just making contact with the paper, you start making these short movements like this. Okay, I'll just change the color of those a little bit because they're all looking a bit dark green. We'll have something with a bit more burnt sienna in it to suggest some closer branches. And of course, if this has been hit by sunshine, then areas and branches on this tree are going to have to carry that warm color also, as they'll be catching the sunlight. Great, okay. Just wondering when I would put in my figures. Before I'm done with the rigger brush, this field is a bit flat looking. So very briefly, we're just going to run a few directional lines. This is a sloping field. Just run a few lines down the field like this. It's much better. Even spatter a little bit of paint across those fields. those lines suggest the long shadows of, there is a hedgerow at the top, out of sight. So, right, we're nearing completion. Right, what am I going to do about these cars? This is how I paint a car. Unless I'm sure about it, I generally leave for the moment the screen, the windscreen, white. But what I do is I soak the vehicle like this with water. There is a bit of colour in this, bit of muddy mix that I just used, the ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna. And I just float this paint over the car like this. I'll go round, if I can, the windscreen. And if I do the same with this one over here, just very wet, just deliberately soak it, have it sort of like a mini swimming pool of weak paint, like this. Then we pick up a paint completely different in its mix, and that is, whereas that was nearly all water, this is nearly all paint. So I'm back at picking up my little mini stash of the two. This combination, incidentally, if you haven't already realized after, at the moment, is a go-to mix. It does so many jobs. It makes fantastic darks, as you can see, and it's reliable. It'll always, because some combinations of blues and reds, depending on whether the pigment is transparent or opaque, don't do this job. But this does do the job, always. Right, so this thick mix now of nearly all paint and no water, I will just run a line at the base of the car, just here, maybe a little bit further into the upwards like this. And what happens is that stronger color is like a shadow, represents the shadowy underside of a car. What I do then is I'll pull down just with one small brush stroke, a wheel, okay? And a wheel either side there, and join the wheels with a dark, as though that's the shadow of the vehicle. So you've got this little glimmer of, excuse me, this little glimmer of light between the underside of the vehicle and the shadow of the road underneath it. Probably take that a little bit further that way. Same over here, just very strong paint. If people, people, if they're not au fait, if they're not familiar with the loose style painting, a lot of people say, well, what is that meant to be? If they don't read it, you've got to accept the fact that they're just not familiar with the loose style most of the time. Having said that, you do need to know a few tricks, because you can't get away with just doing anything and accepting it and accepting the fact that it may or may not look like what it's meant to represent. So what I've discovered with cars is that as long as you give them a light upper, because that catches, it's a very, cars are made of metal, and it's a very hard surface, a very hard reflective surface. So anything that catches the light from above is going to be light, but it's contrasted by the underside of a vehicle being so dark. That's the, if you like, the recipe for drawing a vehicle, so people know what they're looking at. But there's no, you could put brake lights. Let me just show you what I might do with I've got again, tube paint. Only tube paints can do this. This is a really fresh bit of orange, and I'll just place a tail light there and a tail light there. That also suggests that this is a vehicle. But I don't mind the one over here. I don't mind if people can't work out what that is. I'd be very surprised, in fact, because it doesn't sit in an important part of the painting. I'd be very surprised if people would even question it. It's just a shape, just as the house is a shape, just as the tree is a shape, just as this hedgerow is a shape. Okay, so How are we doing time-wise? Well, we're approaching finishing time, folks, but I hope I'm not keeping you, because I'm more than happy to keep going here. And I've only got about 5 minutes left to do anyway. So I'm just making sure that this reads what it's meant to read, and that's a rough, this is a textural surface because it's foliage. You don't have to go painting in, as I might have done many years ago. You start looking to put in lines like little branchlets in it. You just need to put in a dry brush texture over it like this. That'll suffice. But you mustn't hide the color, of course. The idea is to retain the color, and then a little bit of wetter paint in there somewhere. Okay, putting off doing the figures. The figures can be, there's many ways of painting figures. But I tend to, in this situation, use them just a little bit like the car. I use a very watery mix. I'm using mostly blue with a bit of burnt sienna in it. Join the figures, by the way. Don't have them separate. They're joined here, and then this is another thing. You don't put. I still see people doing this, folks. You put in a really solid looking leg and it doesn't look like they're walking. To infer, to convey movement in anything, you always make it only partially painted, partially shaped. You don't put the full leg in, and you certainly don't make them darker than the body, darker than the torso. The legs in trousers or in skirts, whatever, they should be of a paler, weaker tonal value than the body. So let's give them, so I don't paint the heads in. I've left figures sometimes without heads, and nobody, people's brains put the heads in, put in the missing details. And there's a terrible, terrible thing we can do, and that's make the heads too big. So I just placed a couple of very small heads in there. It's surprising how cool, or correct, I should say, an undersized looking head doesn't look undersized, but you go a fraction, a thousandth of a millimeter too big, and the brain says, oh God, they look like aliens. So never, always play down the size of the head. Make them tiny, make them absolutely tiny. I'm looking at my car, and I just sort of want to bring a little bit more to that. Okay, I'm going to dry this very, very quickly, and then we're going to do the finishing wash, shadows and things. I often add little bits after this show, folks, sometimes after the demonstration, and I think, well, and this is one I would have probably added, just doing it now so you can see. Side of the brush, belly of the brush, not the point. Okay, I want to put some dried last season's foliage across there. Just skimming a very weak bit of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna into this tree here. Even though there isn't any on the real tree in the photo, I just think this looks better. Just a bit of stubborn, dried out last season's leaves. Some species will, of course, have that, will hang on to their foliage. I think beeches do. Okay. Right, let's finish this painting. Okay, now my shadows are, I'm just cleaning off a palette here, my palette, because it's a bit sort of the wrong color to start a shadow mix. Bear with me a second. Yeah, so let's start with ultramarine blue. big 1-inch flat brush, ultramarine blue. I'll show you this. I'll bring my mixing palette into view. Try not to spill it onto my painting. Ultramarine blue, a lot of it. Again, you know, tube paint's essential. You'd be there 3 weeks trying to scrub this amount of paint out of one of those dried pans. Bit of a alizarin crimson. That darkens it immediately, but what it's also doing is turning it purple. If I were to run this over a clean white surface, you'd see the purple colour. Because it's so dark, you don't actually see the purple. Now this is too strong, so I have to put water with this. But before I do, I'm just going to put a little bit of the phthalo green into it, and then a little bit of raw sienna, and that just takes the garishness of that colour. I think it needs a bit more of the red. Now that's a good mix, but that'd be too dark and too heavy. So I'm just going to don't whatever you do, if you're not used to doing this, if you just mixed a lot of lovely rich paint with that brush, do not use that brush for picking up your water, because guess what? A lot, and I mean a lot of that mix, that lovely mix, is in your brush, and the minute it goes into your water tub, it's no longer in your brush, and you find yourself running out of paint. So what I do is, there's a couple of options. I use a spritzer, and I just spray in there, or I pick it up. Often I just pick it up by hand on my fingertips, and just drop the water into the mix like that. There's other things, you know, there's pipettes that you can use, droppers. So I think I've got this to about the right consistency now. But as always with my shadows, I always have two things. I have brush in one hand and some paper in the other. This is to pick up anything I don't like. So if I go too dark or too heavy, or I simply go in the wrong place, this takes it off. This is my eraser, and it takes it off straight away. So to be on the safe side, I tend to sort of work somewhere where I think it won't matter too much if it's too strong, and that's the foreground. So I'll come across here. Nice dry brush. See what happens when the brush first lands on this paper. It's fully loaded and will deliver an unbroken area like this. But continue moving that brush, and you will get, it'll run out, and it'll break. It start breaking up like this. So now I can add a tiny bit more water to my mix, because as I travel through here, there's quite a large area of shadow here. So I might need to make a broader. Look at the brush here. It's not flat for this, whereas it was for the first stroke. It'll be a deeper shape here. But as we move progressively into the background, the brush stops being applied on the flat. It's turned to its side, and you're painting your edges like this off the edge of the brush. I'm going to do another quick one through there. I hate working this slowly. It catches me out, and I can make horrible marks. I make those sort of marks I used to make as a novice. So I'm going to try and speed up for this. So next one will be about here, leaving a gap. See, the gaps are quite interesting. So you're not doing uniform spacing here. You do need to block out that though, that entire foreground bit there. I think we're almost done here. I think that's going to have to be shadowed, because look, I've taken a shadow. It's another thing. Shadows follow the lay of the land, okay? It's no good suggesting with other marks that you've made that the road is coming up by here or going down by there. If your shadow comes along and ignores that suggestion, you've got to say, well, what have I suggested with the other marks in the road? Oh, look, I've suggested that, you know, perhaps that's how high it is there. So the shadow must follow the lay of the land, otherwise it looks awful. So as I say, I've brought a shadow along here. It looks to me like it's going to have to go up onto that hedge there. That's better. already this shadows are fantastic. Shadows produce light in your paintings. I'm going to close this off just there. And we cannot ignore shadows, folks, I'm afraid. You have to learn to do them. And once you've painted a shadow confidently, you will paint everything else confidently. So grab the bull by the horns. Don't shy away from it. Shying away is not going to move you on. It's never going to get you anyway. Just grab the bull by the horns, make a lot of bad paintings, make a lot of bad shadows, because eventually, and not that long, once you've decided, you've committed yourself to taking the bull by the horns, you'd be surprised, as long as you keep it up on a weekly basis, that how quickly your confidence will grow. I'm just taking a slightly bigger shadow down the field, but I don't want to lose the lovely bright shape into the field too much. I think we're done. I'm going to put the mount around this and see how it fares. And just clean off my brushes very quickly. There's other, as I say, a couple of other small things I might do. I might just, I like a bit of texture in the foreground. Sorry, it's clattering my lid of my palette here. I like a bit of texture in my foreground. So I'm just show you what I'm doing here. Ultramarine blue again, surprisingly enough, and burnt sienna. And I'm just spattering a little texture in the foreground to the right-hand side. Spattering can really help, but you want to concentrate it to one area of the painting. You don't want to be spattering, just because you've got spattering on this side of your road, doesn't mean to say you've got to do the equal amounts on this side. Do a little bit over here maybe, but keep your texture and your spattering to one area like this. Not much else I could do here. My cable lines that I drew in with pencil, I can still see them. Now, it's your choice. You could rub out the pencil line when the painting is dry and paint those lines in, or just leave them as pencil lines. If you're familiar with the work of John Blockley, you'll be perhaps familiar with the fact that he used to leave a lot of his pencil work remaining in his finished works. Right, let's get that mount. Here we are. And I'll zoom out a little bit, perhaps, so you can see it. Hope you enjoyed that. I did. I thoroughly enjoyed doing that. It's a bit different again.